The first sentence I heard in German that night wasn't an insult or a joke. It was a verdict. She doesn't understand a thing. We can lead her. And I, smiling with the wine glass in my fingers, understood every syllable like recognizing my own name on a list of the missing. The table was too long for an intimate dinner and too short to pretend we were a family. Yellowish light dripping from the chandelier like old honey, cutlery aligned with a zeal that didn't match the real atmosphere, the smell of meat and butter vying for space with an expensive perfume that seemed sprayed to erase any trace of humanity. My husband, Daniel, was impeccable in his dark suit. A man who learned early to use his body as an argument. Straight posture, smile of someone who asks for nothing because he's already taken everything. To his left, his mother, Frau Kruger, with nails painted a red that wasn't sensual but disciplinary. To his right, his partner, Klaus, who had that kind of gaze that measures a person's worth like estimating an object's weight. Across the table, Klaus's wife, a beautiful woman with trained politeness, and a couple of lawyers I only knew by their last name and by the way they avoided looking directly at me, as if I were an inconvenient variable in an elegant equation. I was there because Daniel said it was important. The word important in his vocabulary always meant, "You'll do what I need," without asking questions that force me to lie better. The dinner celebrated the purchase of a smaller company, a strategic move he described as organic growth, though it had the same scent of a hunt. I listened to speeches, toasted at the right time, laughed when everyone laughed. Cold irony is clothing I wear well. I learned to use it before even understanding why. Daniel spoke Portuguese with everyone, with that clean cordiality of someone who knows what can't be said in public. And then, at a certain point, when the main course was served and the conversation spread into small groups, he leaned toward Klaus and his mother and switched languages like closing a door. German. Natural, intimate, automatic. A place where I didn't exist. Except I did. I learned German as a teenager, by chance and stubbornness. My father had been an aviation mechanic and collected engineering books like collecting promises. I grew up reading technical manuals and novels at the same time, and when I got a short scholarship in Hamburg, I returned with the language inside me like a secret I didn't need to tell anyone. When I met Daniel years later, he mentioned that the family was of German origin, that his mother spoke the language at home, that he understood a little. I didn't correct him, didn't confirm, didn't deny. It was instinct, a kind of prudence that disguises itself as indifference. That night, that prudence turned into a blade. Klaus said something and Daniel replied with a low, almost affectionate laugh, the kind he never uses with me when I'm tired or vulnerable. She thinks she's in control because she pays some bills and organizes the house. Klaus made a comment and the mother finished, without the slightest hurry. She's useful as long as she doesn't ask questions. Chewed slowly. The sauce flavor reduced to metal in my mouth. I felt the blood rise to the roots of my hair, and yet my face remained calm, as if my body hadn't just received a diagnosis. They talked about me as if I were furniture that could be moved if it blocked the flow. And then Daniel said the sentence that made me understand it wasn't just contempt. It was a plan. She'll sign. I'll prepare the document. If she resists, we handle it with her mother. My hand didn't tremble, but inside something shifted, like a poorly fitted piece that suddenly fell into place. My mother. The word weighed in the air even in silence. My mother, with her memory failing in recent months, her head muddled from time to time, the vulnerability Daniel pretended to treat as concern. My mother, whom he kept suggesting I put in a place with assistance, for her own good, so I can rest. I always felt a diffuse unease, a smell of something wrong, but love has this grotesque ability to stuff cotton in our ears. Frau Kruger replied coldly, as if talking about replacing plumbing. She's weak. With the right diagnosis, you control the signature and the inheritance. Inheritance. There was the missing word to complete the equation. My father died last year. A discreet death without drama, but with that kind of silence that lingers in the house afterward. He left a small investment portfolio, an old apartment in Curitiba, and a plot of land I didn't even know existed in the countryside, where he dreamed of building something he never started. Daniel, in the first days of mourning, was affectionate. too affectionate. He hugged me when I wasn't crying, offered water when I wasn't thirsty, told me let me handle it before I even asked. And I, exhausted, accepted. I accepted because grief is also a kind of tiredness that convinces you any outstretched hand is love. At the table, Daniel continued, confident in my lack of understanding. We organize everything. She feels guilty, signs to protect her mother. If there's trouble, I say it's instability. No one will believe her. I looked at his face as he said this, then smiling at me in Portuguese, asking if I wanted more wine. It was the same mouth, the same hand, the same man. But it was like seeing a seam that had been hidden before. The dark thread under the skin. I accepted the wine with a sweet thank you. And that's when I made my first silent and dangerous decision. I wouldn't confront them at that table. I wouldn't give them the spectacle they expected. I'd leave that dinner carrying the truth like an invisible weapon. And I'd let them keep talking because people like that always betray themselves when they feel safe. The rest of the night stretched like a hospital corridor. Long, polished, impersonal. Daniel discoursed on values. Klaus toasted the future. His mother touched my arm with that false intimacy of someone marking territory and said in Portuguese that I was more beautiful, as if beauty were a certificate of good behavior. Smiled. I smiled like someone learning a new language, repeating sounds until they feel natural. When we finally left, the street was damp, the air cold, and the city had that sad post-rain clarity. In the car, Daniel drove in silence, relaxed, satisfied with his own performance. He didn't ask if I'd enjoyed the dinner. He didn't need to. He was certain I was a piece already placed on the board, a piece that doesn't even know it's a piece. I looked at the side of his face, the streetlight drawing shadows on his jaw, and an old memory came. My father teaching me to identify defective parts by sound. If you tap lightly and the sound comes back hollow, there's a crack. Daniel had always sounded full. That night I heard the hollow. At home, he went straight to the shower, left his expensive watch on the sink like leaving a signature, and I stayed in the kitchen with the silence and the humming fridge. Picked up my phone. Not on impulse. Methodically. I activated the voice recorder and tested it. The next day I'd do it right. The next morning I visited my mother. She was in her apartment, smelling of brewed coffee and medicine. Sitting in the armchair, eyes lost on a turned-off TV. When she saw me, she smiled as if recognizing me and, at the same time, as if trying to remember from where. That smile was a calm stab. Daniel accompanied me, insistent, kind. He brought fruit. Asked if she'd taken her pills. And in a moment when I went to the kitchen for water, I heard him speaking low to her in the hallway in Portuguese, but with the same predator logic. You know you need to rest, right? We'll take care of everything. Your daughter gets nervous. Sometimes doesn't understand. I returned with the water and he smiled at me as if he hadn't just tried to diminish me in front of my own mother. That's when I perceived the second layer. It wasn't just inheritance. It was reputation. Narrative control. Daniel wanted to turn me officially into the unstable woman. So any resistance from me would be treated as a symptom, not a reaction. This kind of violence leaves no bruises. Leaves records. I started acting like someone preparing an accident that seems inevitable. I called the registry office and requested updated copies of my father's documents. Scheduled an appointment with a neurologist for my mother, not to prove she was ill, but to prove she still had autonomy in many moments. Asked the doctor to record the variations, the lucidities. Found a lawyer, not a family one, not someone recommended by Daniel. A lawyer who spoke little and listened much, like someone with respect for the gravity of what's being heard. Meanwhile, at home I became the perfect wife. The wife who doesn't argue. The wife who trusts. The wife who says sure and understood and you're right. I saw Daniel relax. Saw his ego settle comfortably on the couch of my silence. And saw his mother draw closer, like an animal sensing the smell of surrender. It was on a Friday that the turn two walked through the door, elegant and smiling. Her name was Helena, Daniel's ex-assistant, recently promoted to consultant for the group. and, from what I gathered in seconds, also promoted to another role that doesn't appear on LinkedIn. She showed up at home for a quick meeting, with a folder and a perfume that entered before her. Daniel didn't warn me. He just brought her like bringing a trophy to circulate in the house you pay half for. Helena greeted me with trained sympathy, but her eyes took inventory. She looked at the paintings, the books, my favorite mug. Small things matter to those intending to occupy a place. Daniel and she went to the office, closed the door. I made coffee as if it were normal. And then I heard it. German again, muffled by the wood, but clear enough. She's smarter than she seems. It was Helena. She spoke German fluently, something Daniel didn't know I'd notice. You need to speed up. Daniel replied. Next week. The signature happens. If she makes trouble, we use the mother and internal press. The board hates scandals. Helena laughed low. And after? You handle the divorce without splitting anything. Daniel. She leaves with the unstable narrative. I keep the consolidated assets. I gripped the coffee tray so hard my fingers hurt. And yet I breathed. Low. Clean. Like learning not to cough in an operating room. That was the confirmation I needed. It wasn't paranoia, it was a script. I brought the coffee to the room, knocked on the door, and entered calmly. The conversation stopped instantly. They both smiled at me as if discussing spreadsheets. I served the cups, wished good meeting, and left. In the hallway, I sat on the stairs for a few seconds, just to feel my heart beat and remember I was still a whole body. I'd need that memory. That night I set the trap. Not a dramatic soap opera trap. I didn't need screams. I needed the right stage and irrefutable proof. I invited his mother and Klaus for dinner at home, to celebrate the new contract signing. Daniel was surprised. And, of course, accepted. He always accepted anything that seemed like his control, even when it came from my hands. I said I wanted an elegant gathering. A family moment. He found it cute. He thought I was yielding. That's the vice of men like Daniel. They confuse silence with submission. The dinner was even more cinematic than the first. I made sure of it. Low light, candles, soft music. A scene promising normalcy. So the contrast with the truth would be crueler. My mother didn't come for obvious reasons. I wouldn't put her in the line of fire. But I brought another presence. My lawyer introduced as a work friend, and my friend, a sworn translator, whom I said was interested in German culture. Daniel found it amusing. For him, weakness was always entertainment. During the meal I observed. I no longer had the naivety to chat. I had the lucidity of someone doing a scene reading. Daniel drank more than usual, confident. Frau Kruger looked at me with that cold pleasure of someone already imagining the future, reorganizing the house with my things out. Helena didn't come, which was even better. Antagonists like to watch from afar when they think the ending is already written. At one point, Daniel did exactly what I knew he would. He switched to German like changing clothes in front of a mirror. Klaus responded. The mother joined in. And because I'd created the false security environment, they let loose. I heard my name become an object again. Heard my mother become a tool. Heard my future become table joke. And I pressed, discreetly, the recorder button on my phone, which was inside the decorative vase next to the sideboard. Cheap technology, expensive result. When the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, I felt the night at the exact point. That second when everyone's too relaxed to think of consequences. I stood with the glass in hand and said in Portuguese that I wanted to make a toast. Daniel smiled, proud, as if I were a well-trained dog about to give paw. I looked at them one by one calmly. And then in German I said, "Thank you for coming. I also think it's important to talk when everyone understands what's being said." The silence was physical, like the air thickening. Klaus's eyes widened. Frau Kruger lost face control for half a second, and that half second was gold. Daniel froze. He didn't blink. His glass hovered in the air like a mistake. I continued in German with a calm, almost polite voice. I understood what was planned. About me, about my mother, about the inheritance. I switched back to Portuguese, so no room for misunderstanding claims. And I recorded it. Daniel tried to laugh. That fake laugh he uses to turn shock into a joke. Love, what are you talking about? I looked at him with a serenity I didn't know I had. I'm talking about the moment you said I don't understand anything, and that you can lead me. I'm talking about the moment you discussed how to handle it with my mother, and turn me unstable so I have no credibility. In German. In my house. My lawyer, until then a friend, placed a folder on the table with the delicacy of depositing an unloaded but still scary weapon. My translator friend opened the laptop. Press play. Daniel's voice came out of the speaker with cruel clarity. The same voice that said I love you on other days, now saying she'll sign as if I were a form. His mother talking about the right diagnosis. Klaus suggesting to speed up. They heard themselves like hearing a crime read in court. I didn't need to scream. I just let the truth speak with their own throats. Daniel paled. Frau Kruger tried to react as always with attack. That's an invasion. I smiled briefly. Yes, invasion. That's exactly how I felt when you decided my life in a language you thought was a safe. Klaus tried to negotiate, a word here, another there, as if every disaster could be turned into a deal. My lawyer interrupted with the calm of someone who knows law and people. The recording was made in a private setting where you're an interested party and there are indications of fraud and coercion. We can discuss technicalities later. Today we discuss facts. Daniel finally tried the most predictable blow. You're exaggerating. You've always been sensitive. You misinterpret everything. And that's when my patience ended, but my control stayed. No, I interpret very well. In 2 languages, including. I approached him, close enough for him to feel the woman he underestimated had body, warmth, and direction. You won't touch my mother. You won't lay a finger on my father's inheritance. And you won't call me unstable to justify what you did. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His mask finally had nowhere to cling. The consequences started that same night, like dominoes just waiting for a breath. I asked everyone to leave. Klaus left quickly, with the typical cowardice of men who like to participate without signing. Frau Kruger lingered last, looking at me as if I'd broken a sacred tradition. You think you've won? I replied with calculated sweetness. I think I've stopped losing. Daniel tried to sleep at home. I didn't allow it. Not for drama. For emotional hygiene. He left with a small suitcase, and I saw a tremble in his hands I'd never seen before. It wasn't regret. It was fear. Fear of not controlling the plot. The following week, I filed for divorce and a protective asset measure. I formally notified the company board based on attempted coercion and fraud, with proof. The scandal Daniel said the board hated became the instrument that destroyed him. He was temporarily removed. Helena, watching from afar, vanished with the elegance of someone who knows certain ships sink fast. And, in a twist I didn't expect but savored silently, Frau Kruger discovered that in Brazil, a last name isn't always a get-out-of-jail-free card. I don't romanticize what came after. It was tough. There were messages from friends who weren't. There were looks accusing me of ruining a brilliant man's career. There were people who asked with false concern if I was okay, if I wasn't unbalanced for exposing couple things. I learned to recognize social cowardice. It always uses the word peace to protect the aggressor. My mother, with her memory lapses and bursts of lucidity, looked at me one day and said, "That man, he was strange, huh?" And I felt a deep sadness that she'd perceived it late. But also pride that I'd perceived it in time. The new beginning didn't come with fireworks. Came with routine. I returned to taking care of what was mine. Organized documents, restructured investments, secured my father's apartment in my name, fenced the countryside land, and went there for the first time, to step on that ground he kept as his last idea. I started therapy not to fix myself, but to not let his poison become my personality. I slept alone for weeks, and on some nights, Solitude felt like an entity sitting in the room's corner. But I preferred her presence to the ghost of a man who called me a thing. Months later, I saw Daniel by chance at a cafe. He was thinner, less steady, as if his own image had lost its sponsor. He looked at me like trying to reclaim an old narrative. I didn't give him that luxury. I just passed by, whole, unhurried. The cold irony that time wasn't defense. It was statement. I lost a marriage, yes. But I recovered something rarer than poorly distributed love. My autonomy. And if there's a revenge worth it, it's this one that needs no audience. The last thing I learned from Daniel was simple, and I keep it like a dark jewel. When someone believes you don't understand, they reveal what they are. And when you do understand, you decide if you'll keep pretending. I didn't pretend anymore. And the most beautiful part, they never knew when I started speaking German. They only found out when it was too late.